The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David and the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, and by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Aminadab, and Aminadab the father of Nashon, and Nashon the father of Salmon. Salmon or Salmon? Salmon?
Salmon.
Salmon. Cool.
I think.
The father of Boaz by Rab, Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham. Well, they've been busy. And Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Matan, and Matan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Jesus Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. Did that pretty well, I think.
Better than I would have done, definitely.
Other than there being a lot of genealogy, I think it's very interesting. I was talking to Mitch about this earlier, that they trace the genealogy from Jesus's father, right? Joseph, who's not really his biological father.
Right. It's just his dad.
Right. But isn't that interesting?
Well, there's an important reason for this, and because he said if you're a Christian, at least you believe that Joseph isn't his biological father, he doesn't really have a biological
Right.
father. Mm-hmm. He's a son of God. So Matthew, according to church tradition, is written by Matthew Levi, who makes an appearance as the tax collector,
right,
sort of a bit of a cameo a bit later on. And Matthew is specifically targeting this gospel basically for the Jews of the time. Mm-hmm. So he's trying to sell the Jews the idea that Jesus is the Son of God and that he fulfills all of the Old Testament prophecies in the Jewish law, which is why there's so many references going back to, as you will see, to the Old Testament in this. So genealogy in Judaism is very important because of their whole kind of argument is that they are descendants of the fathers of Israel. Mm-hmm. So what Matthew is doing in this genealogy is basically trying to demonstrate to the Jews of the time that Jesus has the legitimacy of the law. He's inherited the kind of the Jewish tradition, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about if you look a bit deeper into this, so one of the sort of Old Testament prophecies, I think it was from when just after Solomon built the temple, if I remember correctly, the promise was that a son of David would be the Messiah, basically. So what he's doing here is that he's an Abraham. So what he's doing here is that he's tracing the lineage back to Abraham and David, so that he can say to the Jews that actually this guy is a descendant of the people of the two people that God promised us were going to come to save the world. And even so in the kind of culture of the time, in the kind of the ancient Jewish tradition, numbers would often symbolize something. So he emphasizes at the end 14 generations from David and 14 generations from the deportation of Babylon. 14 is basically the number that symbolized King David. So he's really emphasizing that there's lineage directly from David and Abraham in this
Really drilling the point
he's
home.
drilling he's selling it to them basically.
Yeah.
He's really trying to emphasize
And they weren't convinced, presumably.
Yeah, well, some were, some not.
Okay,
Yeah. So on your point of why does this matter if he's not actually biologically descended of David?
I see.
This lineage is the lineage according to the Jewish law.
I see.
So even though Joseph isn't really kind of his biological dad, by the kind of Jewish law of standards of the time, he's kind of I don't know if they have this in the States, but at secondary schools in the UK, when you get a letter sent home, it says "Dear Parent / Guardian." So you can almost kind of see the Jewish law kind of almost sees Joseph as kind of the guardian of Christ. You know, he's sort of father by law almost.
I see.
So he's selling them the idea according to their own customs and their own law.
That's very interesting because I never saw the significance of really that. I mean, I understood the significance that, oh, he's descendant of Abraham, but it didn't strike me as much. But the fact that it's the first passage right after the Old Testament is like, demonstrating, okay, this is all of that, led up to this, which I did not pay attention to before.
That is very interesting.
Okay.
So why was 14 the sort of number that represented David?
I'm trying to. It had something to do with. I think it was the way that they would write in their language. That things. I can't remember the exact reason, to be completely honest, but I think it had something to do with language and how they kind of noted stuff down in the kind of in their ancient texts. I can't remember the exact reason, to be honest, but I know for a fact that 14 was often the number that symbolized David. Yeah.
Okay. It's fascinating.
So why don't we move on, Matthew? Why don't you finish verse 1, or chapter 1, and
Oh, sorry, just one more point. If
yeah.
Another thing that's quite revealing, because even though he's contextualizing this very much in the kind of culture and the religion of the time, the Jewish law, essentially, he also mentions, notice the wives. So he's almost sort of culminating every single Old Testament biblical figure of the Torah figures. And a slightly sort of more kind of philosophical point. A lot of the names in this lineage, some of them were great figures, but a lot of them were also, they're saints and they're sinners in this lineage. And so Rahab, for example, even though she was a great heroine of the Torah, she was a prostitute, which, I mean, I know we're more open-minded to this stuff nowadays, but put this in the cultural context, that's obviously a big deal for an ancient Jew. David got up to loads of sort of dodgy shenanigans himself. So when Matthew's pushing this idea that this is the Son of God, which is basically his thesis almost, he's incorporated almost the entirety of mankind in this genealogy. He's got the men, the women, the saints, the sinners, the good, the bad.
Oh, okay.
So there's this. He's already sort of laying out the sense that Christ isn't for a select few men; it's for all men. It's for the whole of mankind. So there is, that's quite a nice kind of philosophical thought to have in the back of your mind when you continue with the rest of the gospel.
I'm incredibly impressed, I should say, because I took nothing out of this passage before, and now it kind of has a whole new meaning for me.
I think Holy Tradition, Church Tradition teaches us that everything in the Bible and the Gospels is there for a reason. There's no such thing as a kind of boring passage in the Bible. It's all it has every word here has been carefully picked to kind of serve a purpose.
Well, I guess because it's been selected to go in the corpus that is.
Yeah.
I would imagine there'd be quite a lot of intentionality around.
And of course, he's making a massive argument. He's not arguing some kind of abstract, existentialist philosophical principle. He's literally trying to make the case that someone is the Son of God. Everything is reliant on this one man, essentially Jesus. So everything is very carefully selected, as we'll probably go on to find out. But yeah, I think that's the kind of core historic and theological things to bear in mind with the genealogy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And another thing that's on the topic of this being Joseph's lineage, Luke gives a different lineage, which is his biological one according to Mary, which also goes back to David. So if you go to Luke somewhere, I can't remember which chapter is in particular. But the lineages are different, and the reason is that the lineage of Luke is believed to be the lineage of Mary. So this is Joseph's, and the reasons is that Luke is trying to basically sell his point to the Gentiles, who will care more about biological lineage because how their society was set up.
The Gentiles being, sorry,
Sort of
Non-Jews.
Romans and
okay.
yeah, yeah. So so there are two lineages in the New Testament, and they're both there for different reasons.
Wow. Fantastic.
Shall we?
Yes, please.
The birth of Jesus Christ. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus. He will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Quote, Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but he knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. It's a very short passage.
Yeah.
For the kind of a very sort of key moment in the kind of Christian tradition, because we celebrate it every year, right? That's quite a you'd think it'd be a bigger passage.
Yeah, I think that again is the Matthew trying to appeal to the argument that this is a fulfillment of Jewish law, where you could almost see this. He's almost making a kind of a legal case where he's saying this is what happened, and then he refers back to the Old Testament as to how this event. So it's almost like he's arguing for something in court. Almost, he's kind of saying this is what happens, and here's the evidence for why it happened, referring back to the Old Testament. And then he comes back. Another interesting thing to note on the Old Testament stuff is that you might have noticed that there's a kind of he emphasizes Joseph's dream, which could be him drawing a parallel to the famous Joseph of the Old Testament, who was, the multicolored coat, or you might have had school assemblies about it and stuff. Who also was famous for having dreams and interpreting them, and so there's again he's kind of drawing a bit of a parallel between the character, the person of Joseph, and also Joseph of the Old Testament. But this is, I think, ultimately the more important thing is that this is a very good example of how Matthew is kind of laying out his case to the people of the time. Almost a sort of a legalistic kind of Old Testament Jewish law reference.
And which prophet is it referring to when it says all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, and then gives the quote about behold the virgin? If you know,
I can't remember off the top of my head, to be completely honest. The Old Testament is so long and complex; it's hard to remember.
No, fair enough.
Remember everything.
I read somewhere that that Jesus fulfilled over 300 prophecies, but they're spread out all throughout the Old Testament in various books.
Okay.
Even poetry, some of the Psalms and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a rabbit hole.
Sounds it.